What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. I'm here to break down this weekend's UFC Fight Night Cejudo versus Song main card. We're going to be taking a deep dive into each of these matchups from a betting perspective, and I hope you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. This event is the kind of event we do extremely well on long term. My speciality is live betting on the UFC. Live betting on the UFC wasn't something you could do in the United States for the longest time. For the majority of my career, I've been doing this for 15 years, but I see a lot more people on MMA Twitter talking about live betting on the UFC these days. So if you are interested in it, you're probably finding it very difficult because you're not able to live bet the fights in real time because you're probably behind what the bookies are seeing. I'm able to live bet the fights in real time. It gives us a huge edge, and that's the reason why we make a profit on just under 70% of events. Is 68 point something. So check out the links in the description below, check out my website, and consider joining my live betting group. If you watch every UFC event live, you're basically getting paid to watch the UFC, and we're having a little bit of a dip at the moment due to some issues with latency, which I've now fixed. So this is a great time to join. As you can see, anytime we have a little flat period in the past, we always follow it up with a huge winning run. So rather than me coming here after we've had a huge winning run, like here, and saying, come join me, and then we float around break even for a few months, just like in stocks, just like in crypto, buy the fucking dip, probably a good time to join, right, when we haven't been doing so well, because we always follow it up with a big winning run. So let's dive into breaking down the main event on this weekend's card, which is going to be Henry Cejudo versus Yadong Song. And actually, I just want to bring up an article, groin injury, because it is quite relevant to my breakdown for this fight. So we'll just bring this article up here. We'll refer to it in a moment. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this fight, we can see that Song Yadong is an average of around, it's quite a big odds spread actually, anywhere from 1.32 to 1.38. We'll meet in the middle. We'll call it 1.35, which is going to be minus 286 for an implied probability of 74%. If we take a look at the odds on Cejudo, he's around an average of 3.20, which is going to be plus 220 for an implied probability of 31%. So Cejudo is 38 years old, 5'4", with a 67.5-inch reach. Yadong Song is 27 years old, 5'8", with a 67-inch reach. So there's quite a lot of X factors for us to dig into here before we even consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. Where do we begin? Let's start with age. So before we even consider how old Song is, Cejudo's 38 years old, which is very, very old for a bantamweight. So we know that the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism, which are some of the first things to go as you start to get older. 38 years old is very old for any division in the UFC, but for the lighter weight classes like bantamweight, it's absolutely ancient. So Cejudo is going to be declining a lot from fight to fight, and I do feel if you look at how some of his recent performances have gone, he's definitely showing signs of decline. His last fight against Baghdasaryan, a great example of that. So Song is 11 years younger than Cejudo. He's in the total opposite position. He's going to be making rapid improvements from fight to fight. And just like we've seen Father Time start to take his toll on Cejudo, as Cejudo has declined over the last few years, Song is making big improvements from fight to fight, and he continues to improve. And statistically, we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's an 11-year age gap on a fight. Now, ironically, there were two 40-year-olds competing on last week's card, Angela Hill, Gregory Rodriguez, Angela Hill and Jared Cannonier. They both won, which very much defied the odds. It's very rare you'll see a 40-year-old beat a fighter in their early 30s, late 20s. Extremely rare. To have two of them on the same card, it's kind of wild, but just one of those crazy bits of variance we see in the UFC every once in a while, and in professional sports it's going to happen. You know what it's like. You know, you could be waiting around an hour for a bus to come and pick you up at a bus stop and then two arrive at once. It's that kind of thing, right? I do feel the decision on the Angela Hill-Katlyn Souza fight was very, very bad, and Souza won the fight clear, but obviously it doesn't mean anything if the judges didn't agree. But anyway, even though those two fighters, Angela Hill and Cannonier, were able to defy that trend, trends are strong, trends are meaningful for a reason, and the younger fighter winning around 70% of the time when there's an 11-year age gap in a fight needs to be taken seriously. What is interesting about that statistic is if we pop in Song's average odds to the implied probability calculator, the implied probability on these odds is in the ballpark of where that age statistic gives Song his chances of winning. So it's a young man's game, father times undefeated, and I wouldn't want to be betting against a trend as strong as that this weekend, even though Cejudo is a decent sized underdog. Cejudo's also got his hands full though because of the size difference in this one. Obviously Cejudo has previously fought at flyweight. He was the flyweight champion. He's now competing at bantamweight. And while both these guys have got similar sort of reach, you can see that Song is going to be taller, 4 inches taller. Cejudo 5'4", Song 5'8". And we know the size, physicality is a pretty big deal in mixed martial arts. We've got weight classes for a reason. And a few weeks ago, when we broke down the Tatiana Suarez versus Weili Zhang fight, during that breakdown, we leaned towards Zhang because we were talking about how she's one of the most physically imposing female fighters in the UFC, certainly the most physically imposing fighter in her division, and Suarez was likely going to struggle to deal with that physicality. Have a feeling we may see something similar here. I think size as well as age is going to have an influence on this matchup, and I do think Song's likely to be too big, too strong, too powerful for Cejudo. I think it is going to be difficult for Cejudo to take Song down and control him. So the other X factor that we've got to consider on this matchup is that Cejudo looked very... I don't want to say Cejudo looked very bad in his last fight against Dvalishvili because that's not fair or accurate. But what I will say is that Cejudo showed us things, and not good things, that we've never seen from him before. So if you go back and watch the Dvalishvili fight in the cold light of day, you will see him look amazing in round 1. He totally dominated Dvalishvili in round 1. And if Cejudo could have fought for 3 rounds, how he could have fought for 1 round of that fight, he would have dominated Dvalishvili. He would have won very easily, and he likely would have gone on to fight Sean O'Malley for the title. In the first round, Cejudo outstruck Dvalishvili, knocked him down, took him down, and held him down quite easily. Now, throughout Cejudo's career, generally speaking, his cardio has been really good. It was a bit shaky when he first came into the UFC, but then his cardio improved, and he was able to go at a good pace for 3 rounds, 5 rounds, which you'd expect because he was a flyweight champion. You can't become a flyweight champion if you've got bad cardio, although Alexandre Pantoja may have something to say about that. But you get my point. Cejudo's cardio is generally pretty good. What we saw in that first round against Dvalishvili was Cejudo looking great in round 1 and in total control, and then in round 2 he gassed out of nowhere. Like, just got tired, just looked flat, just gassed out, and it was very uncharacteristic for Cejudo. It's not something we usually see from him. It was kind of strange. Now, obviously, Dvalishvili has built a career off wearing guys down, tiring them out, dragging them into deep water, and then backdooring decisions. That's the way he won the title against Sean and defended the title against Umar Nurmagomedov. But the thing is, what was particularly strange about Cejudo slowing down against Dvalishvili was, first of all, how early in the fight it happened. Cejudo was looking tired just a couple minutes into round 2, which is very unusual because we've seen him in fast-paced, grueling fights before. The Demetrius Johnson fight was an absolute sprint. The Aljamain Sterling fight, because of how strong and physically imposing Sterling is, that was quite a fast-paced fight as well. So it was unusual to see Cejudo slow after 2 minutes into the second round. I'm not surprised if anyone slows against Dvalishvili, but that early into a fight for someone with cardio like Cejudo's usually got, it's a little bit strange. And then the second thing that was strange about his performance against Dvalishvili was that he didn't really exert tons of energy in round 1. He was kind of in total control. He spent a good amount of time in top position, controlling Dvalishvili, where he wouldn't have had to have used that much energy. And at the point in the fight where Cejudo started to slow, it wasn't like Dvalishvili had really done all that much to wear him down. So it really didn't take much to make Cejudo gas out at all, which again is very uncharacteristic for a fighter like Henry Cejudo. So at the time of the fight, in my live betting group, I remember, we were talking about how Cejudo was absolutely cruising. It looked like it was going to be a very easy fight for him. He dominated round 1. And then when he just gassed out of nowhere in round 2, we were kind of scratching our heads and going, well, Father Time's undefeated. And obviously Cejudo's got old, he's declined, and he just can't fight at the pace that he used to. His cardio's not what it used to be. And then after the fight came out, Henry Cejudo came out and said that he had a horrible training camp from Baghdasaryan, basically fought with a groin injury at UFC 298, and his cardio was bad because he couldn't do cardio training properly, like going out doing road work, running on a treadmill, whatever, because of this groin injury. So this adds some complication to trying to predict how this fight is likely to go, because if Cejudo shows up with good enough cardio to go hard for 5 rounds, I think this fight will be very close, very competitive, and then there probably is value on Cejudo. But if Cejudo shows up and performs like he did against Baghdasaryan, Song should absolutely dominate, because Cejudo doesn't have the power in his hands to knock Song out, or perhaps he lands a crazy shot out of nowhere and knocks him out, but it's not that likely. And Cejudo doesn't have the physicality and the cardio to take Song down and control him for 5 rounds if his cardio looked like it did in his last fight against Baghdasaryan. So where we've got this uncertainty over the groin injury, this really does complicate things. And like I say, if he did fight with a groin injury and that had a bad impact on his cardio, his camp, his performance against Baghdasaryan, and he looks a lot better against Song, should be a very close fight. But fighters say shit like this all the time. How much of it can you believe? It's difficult to say. So from a technical point of view, in terms of how these two match up stylistically, Song's takedown defense is kind of similar to Weili Zhang's in that, now think back to that first round of the Tatiana Suarez fight, and then think about rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5. At times, Weili Zhang's takedown defense, at times Yadong Song's takedown defense looks amazing. They're strong, they're physically imposing, they're difficult to get down. But at times, they also give up very cheap takedowns. Think back to how easily Tatiana got Zhang down in round 1 and how easily Rose got her down in a fight in 2021. Song's kind of the same. For the most part, his takedown defense is very good. Very difficult to take down. He's strong. He's got great balance. It's difficult to upset his balance and put him on his back. But he's not impossible to take down. And for a very technical chain wrestler like Cejudo, he likely is going to be able to get Song down. The problem is, Song's quite good at resisting takedowns most of the time, so he can make you burn through a lot of energy to get the takedown. And if Cejudo's cardio looks as bad as it did when he fought, Baghdasaryan, I could see Cejudo burning through a lot of energy trying to get Song to the ground and keep him on the ground. Now, when it comes to keeping Song on the ground, again, he's quite similar to Zhang. If you take him down close to the cage, generally speaking, he's pretty good at using the cage to wall walk back up to his feet. But if you take him down out in the middle of the octagon, he does tend to be pretty weak off his back, and you can hold him down pretty easily. So it's an interesting fight. Cejudo can have some success with his grappling. My question would be, does he have the cardio to have success for the full 5 rounds? That's where it gets tricky. Let me just double check. This is definitely a 5-round main event, right? Yeah. Just wanted to double check because, whenever you've got a fight like this, which probably does hinge on one guy's cardio, I just wanted to make sure it was 5 rounds. Because if it's 3 rounds, that changes things. That makes it a lot more likely Cejudo would win. Alright, so in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, this is really where you could see physicality cause Cejudo a big problem. Because while Cejudo is a technical striker, he doesn't hit particularly hard and never has. He's got the odd knockout win here and there, but for the most part, he's a volume striker. And with Song being that much bigger than him, essentially this is a flyweight not wanting to cut weight against a big bantamweight. I don't think Cejudo's really going to be able to hurt Song on the feet. Cejudo's got good footwork, good movement, great leg kicks. We saw him cause he'll give Dominic Cruz hell with leg kicks. He's got very good leg kicks. Song does stand heavy on the lead leg, so I think Cejudo can have some success with his leg kicking game, but I think Song's going to be too strong, hit too hard, be too physically imposing. For the most part, we'll be able to walk Cejudo down, get the better of the exchanges, especially as the fight wears on and Cejudo gets tired and flatter. So if we summarize everything, what does this mean from a betting point of view? For me, this is a tricky one, because you guys know how I feel about betting big favourites in MMA. I don't like it. In order for me to consider betting a guy in this odds range, they have to have virtually no way to lose, because their implied probability is 74%, which means in order to get a good margin of value over the bookies, you got to be giving them like an 80% chance of winning, which is very difficult to do, especially against a former world champion like Cejudo and someone as well-rounded as Cejudo, especially when there are issues with Song's takedown offense and ground game, even though Song might be too big and strong for Cejudo to take him down and hold him down. So this is one of those fights where I don't love the odds on Song. I wouldn't bet Song at these odds because he doesn't fit my criteria of what I need to see the better guy in this odds range, where he has virtually no way to lose, because I think he does have ways to lose. But at the same time, I've been doing this for too long to trust fighters when they say stuff like this at the age of 38. Did Cejudo look terrible against Baghdasaryan because he had a groin injury? Very possible, very likely. But could it also have been because he's a 38-year-old bantamweight and Father Time is undefeated? That's pretty damn likely as well. So I don't want to bet on a 38-year-old flyweight against a 28, 27-year-old young, hungry, up-and-coming bantamweight like Yadong Song. I just don't want to do it, because even though the odds are terrible on Song, I'd still be surprised if he lost. So this one's an easy pass for me. And, you know, I'm not even sure if I would say it's dog or pass. I'm not even sure I would say play the odds on this one and just take Cejudo as the underdog, because trying to make a long-term profit betting 38-year-olds to beat 27-year-olds, it's a long, hard path to walk. And every once in a while we'll get those fights that defy the trend, defy the odds. Hell, we had two of them last week with Angela Hill and Jarrett Cannonier winning. But generally speaking, it's a tough path to walk. This is a young man's game, so I would just prefer to pass on this one. In terms of the over-under, it is very likely the fight goes deep. Both are tough, both are well-rounded. You can see that Cejudo frequently goes deep in fights. The same can be said for Song. However, Song is mean, nasty, aggressive, does hit hard, and at 38 years old, Cejudo's not going to be as durable as he was earlier in his career. So again, I don't really like the idea of betting on a 38-year-old man to last 25 minutes against a young, hungry, up-and-coming bull like Yadong Song. I just don't think it's a particularly smart thing to do. So, yeah, it's tricky. Very, 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 very tricky. In terms of the over-under, I mean, it's more likely to go to a decision, but again, I wouldn't bet that. And most likely outcomes for the props, I guess, is Song by decision. Wow, Song by knockout or TKO is terrible. Yeah, the odds on these props absolutely dead. I wouldn't bother with them. And so now let's move on to the next fight. So now let's break down the co-main event on this card, which is going to be Brendan Allen versus Anthony Hernandez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Hernandez is the favourite at average odds of about 1.29, which is going to be minus 345 for an implied probability of 78%. We take a look at the odds on Allen. He's around an average of 3.50, which is going to be plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. So Allen is 29 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach. Hernandez, 31 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. So both guys about the same age, about the same size. Nothing too major there. So this is a great stylistic matchup for Anthony Hernandez, and I would expect him to win very easily. It's not too often I talk like this in MMA, but I would be amazed if Hernandez were to lose this weekend. So if you're looking for a guy to throw into your parlays, bump the odds up a little bit, Hernandez is probably a pretty good candidate for that. It's a very bad stylistic matchup for Brendan Allen. Now, he does have the advantage when it comes to striking. We know Hernandez's striking defense isn't the best. He's not the best offensively. But we do know that Hernandez is a good offensive wrestler with good grappling control. He understands position and he's absolutely relentless on the ground. So Allen's one of these guys with bad takedown defense. He's quite weak off his back. And even though he does have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's one of these guys that just doesn't understand the importance of position over submission. And so as a result, he just gives up cheap takedowns, gives up position a lot on the ground, and is generally quite easy to control. Hernandez should be able to get him down relatively easily in this fight and control him relatively easily. So, yeah, Hernandez should get the job done pretty easily. In terms of the over-under, very likely this fight goes to a decision. Both guys are tough, both are well-rounded. Hernandez does have a lot of wins inside the distance in recent times, but that's generally because he's either facing guys with bad cardio or guys that are very bad on the ground. Allen is skilled enough to defend himself on the ground and has good enough cardio to go for 3 hard rounds, and you can see that Allen frequently goes deep in fights. So this is one of those matchups where I actually would be scouting the over 2.5 rounds fight to go to a decision. Think that's very likely to hit, and obviously gives you a better return than betting on Hernandez money line. I would not be touching Allen in this fight. In terms of most likely outcome, the only one I would consider would be Hernandez by decision, but his odds are absolutely terrible, and so yeah, not a lot of upside in betting on that. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Melzik Baghdasaryan versus Gene Silva. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see the Silva is the favourite at average odds of about 1.18, which is going to be minus 556 for an implied probability of 85%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, where is he? Baghdasaryan, he's around an average of, call it 4.90, which is going to be plus 390 for an implied probability of 20%. So Silva is 28 years old, 5'7", with a 69-inch reach. Baghdasaryan, 33 years old, 5'9", with a 70-inch reach. So both guys about the same age, about the same size, nothing too major going on there. And obviously both guys are primarily strikers. Now, we know that Baghdasaryan has pretty bad takedown defense and he's pretty low level on the ground. Silva likes to stand and bang. He is predominantly a striker, but he's also a far better grappler than Baghdasaryan. It's unlikely Silva will take this fight to the ground because he likes to stand and strike, but if he did, he would have the advantage there, and he doesn't need to worry about anything that Baghdasaryan can throw at him on the ground. So grappling, big advantage for Silva, which starts to justify his big price tag in this fight. But I would expect this to be a stand-up fight. Both these guys like to stand and strike. Therefore, we're pretty much guaranteed to get a stand-up fight in this one, in my opinion. Now, I am very high on Gene Silva. I think he's a very high-level striker. I think he's very dangerous. I think he very likely wins this fight. I was super impressed with him in his last couple fights against Charles Jourdain and Drew Dober, because Silva had a bit of a baptism of fire in the UFC. You know, he made his debut against Westin Wilson, and then suddenly he's facing very mean, nasty, violent, dangerous strikers in Drew Dober and Charles Jourdain, and he blew through both of them. He dominated both Dober and Jourdain, which is extremely impressive. A lot of the time when you get these debutants in the UFC and they get fast-tracked into tough fights too quickly, it's too much too soon, and they end up struggling. But Silva is a fighter that has passed those tests with flying colours, and needless to say, he's already beaten better guys than Baghdasaryan in the UFC. I think Dober and Jourdain are two fighters that are much more difficult opponents to deal with on the feet. So Silva very much, very likely wins this fight. All I will say is, obviously, I do feel Silva's advantages are baked into the odds. So while he should win this fight, he's beaten better strikers than Baghdasaryan. He's a better striker than Baghdasaryan. Baghdasaryan does hit hard. He's mean, he's nasty, he's explosive, he's flashy, he's unpredictable. I'm not sure if I would say the odds feel wide on this fight to me, because I have no desire to bet Baghdasaryan at all. But again, whenever we're dealing with fighters in this odds range, they have to have virtually no way to lose. Like, in order to get any value on Silva this weekend, you've got to give him like 90% chance of winning, which is crazy, because he does like to stand and bang. He does like to get into exchanges. He does like to mix it up. And ultimately, it only takes one big shot to land, and his night's over. Is that likely to happen? Not really. But then when you look at his odds, you don't really have much room for error with how big of a favourite he is. So from my perspective, this fight's an easy pass. Silva should win, but his odds are way too steep for me to even consider throwing him in a parlay, since he's likely to go to war this weekend, and he only needs to eat one big shot to completely bust your entire parlay, whereas someone like Anthony Hernandez, far safer bet in my opinion, because Allen's not that dangerous on the feet and Hernandez is a far better grappler. So yeah, Silva should get the job done, but the odds are shocking. In terms of the over-under, I do actually think there's a reasonably good chance the over 1.5 rounds hits on this, just because they're both very skilled strikers, they're both tough, they're both durable. You can see that most of Baghdasaryan's fights go over 1.5 rounds. Admittedly, he isn't fighting guys as dangerous as Gene Silva up until this point in his career, but you can also see that Silva frequently goes deep as well. So even though both guys are very dangerous, they're also both quite skilled, technical, and decent at defending themselves. So I don't know if I would bet the over 1.5 rounds. I'll have to give it some consideration. If you're in my Discord community, I'll obviously let you know, but it is certainly tempting. In terms of most likely outcomes for the props, Silva by decision is probably the most likely outcome. The odds on Silva by knockout or TKO are way too short, just because Baghdasaryan is a decent striker. I don't really like the props on this fight. The only two decent realistic outcomes I see is Silva by decision, Silva by knockout or TKO, and the odds are dreadful on both. So that is an easy pass for me. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's move on to the next fight. So now let's break down the fight between Julius Walker and Alonzo Menifield. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Menifield, where are you, Mr. Menifield? He is the favourite at average odds of about 1.41, which is going to be minus 244 for an implied probability of 71%. And if we take a look at the odds on Walker, he's around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Walker, 25 years old, 6'4" with an 81-inch reach. This guy is absolutely huge. And Menifield, 37 years old, 6 foot tall with a 76-inch reach. So Walker with a bit of a size and reach advantage here over Mr. Menifield. And we can also see quite a big age gap as well. So Walker is going to be 12 years younger than Alonzo Menifield, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight. However, Walker is very inexperienced at just 6-0, and he is making his UFC debut. It's not easy making a UFC debut. Obviously, bright lights of the UFC, octagon jitters, all that kind of stuff. It is difficult. Now, in terms of what to expect from Walker this weekend, it's very, very difficult. There's not much footage available on him. If you check his record, you can see all of his fights have ended very, very quickly. And so we don't really know much about him. We don't know much about his cardio, his striking, his takedown defense, ground game. He is a bit of an unknown. Just kind of been signed to the UFC and thrown in there against a very tough opponent to make your debut against. We know that Menifield is well-rounded, reasonably good cardio. He does slow his fights wear on, but nothing terrible. Good takedown defense, good offensive wrestling, although it's very rare he tries to take his opponents down. Reasonably good striking, true legit knockout power, reasonably tough. It's a very difficult debut for Walker, but I don't really know what his chances of winning are because there's very little footage available on him. I don't know a lot about him, and hopefully this fight goes the distance this weekend. We get to see him tested in lots of different areas, so the next time he fights we'll know more about him. And when it comes to the over-under, when it comes to the props, there's no way I can give you any advice on highly specific outcomes such as this when Walker is a complete unknown. So this fight's an easy pass. We just have to wait and see how it goes. Hope you found that useful. You probably didn't because I didn't say a whole lot. But hopefully we learn more about Walker this weekend. So now let's move on to the next fight. Now let's break down the final fight on this card, which is one of the most interesting matchups on this card. It's going to be Gene Matsumoto versus Rob Font. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Matsumoto is the favourite at average odds of about 1.63, which is going to be minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Font, he's around an average of 2.30, which is going to be plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So before we get into how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I do want to let you guys know Matsumoto is one of the guys that I am considering a pre-fight bet on this week. I haven't pulled the trigger yet, mainly because if you look at his odds movement chart, you can see that his odds are continuing to improve. Money coming in on Font, therefore there's no rush for me to make my decision. I can wait and see how they look at the weigh-ins. I can give it a bit more thought. Maybe I can research the fight a second time. Listen to some interviews coming out later in the week from both fighters. See how I feel about it. Obviously, if you're in my Discord, I will let you know if I do end up pulling the trigger on Matsumoto. I haven't made my mind up yet, but I'm very, very tempted for all the reasons that we'll discuss in this breakdown. But I do tend to make my decisions quite late on fights anyway. So if we start off with the tail of the tape, so Matsumoto is 25 years old, 5'6" with a 68.5-inch reach. Font is 37 years old, 5'8" with a 71.5-inch reach. So both guys are about the same size, but there is a pretty big age gap with Matsumoto being 12 years younger than Font. So we know the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there is a 12-year age gap in a fight, which does give Matsumoto a big statistical advantage. And this is just one of the reasons why I'm very tempted to bet Matsumoto this weekend, because if we were to just blind bet fighters that were 12 years younger than their opponent in this odds range over the long term, we probably would make a profit, because if we know younger fighters win around 70% of the time when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight, that gives us a nice 9% margin over the bookies based on these odds. So these odds do seem quite attractive on Matsumoto, and I do also think this is potentially a really good stylistic matchup for him as well. There is one issue with Matsumoto, and that is that he's kind of coming in on short notice. The fight was announced, I believe, early this week or late last week, and so Matsumoto is coming into this fight against Font on short notice. This is obviously a big step up in competition for him, although I would argue stylistically Argueta is probably a more difficult stylistic matchup. But it's not really short notice. Matsumoto was originally scheduled to fight on UFC 313, which is taking place in a few weeks' time. So by the time this fight starts on 24th of February, Matsumoto is going to be coming on just over, I guess, a week earlier than he had been scheduled to fight anyway. So it's not like really short notice for Matsumoto. It's just something for us to think about. Does add a slight bit more risk to betting Matsumoto, but he's a young guy, and I'm sure he's in great shape. And he's only 5'6", which isn't huge for bantamweight. So hopefully his weight cut's not too brutal. It's easier for you to make weight when you're younger anyway. And so yeah, it's just something for us to think about. So in terms of how these two match up stylistically, obviously they're both primarily strikers. They both like to stand and strike. You would expect this to be a stand-up fight. If this fight does go to the ground, I would give Matsumoto the advantage. Font is one of these fighters that does give up cheap takedowns, and he's very weak on his back. Generally speaking, Font's the kind of guy that if you take him down, he's quite easy to hold down and control. And while Matsumoto doesn't usually shoot takedowns, he did shoot the odd takedown against Brad Katona in his last fight, and he did manage to snatch a nasty choke and submit Dan Argueta in his UFC debut. So Matsumoto has some skills on the ground, certainly more skills in my opinion than Font. I would give Matsumoto the advantage on the ground. So we've touched on the age gap between these two, and when it comes to Rob Font, I do feel we've seen significant decline in him. Now, he did perform well in his last fight against Kyler Phillips after moving to train under Faraz Sahabi at TriStar. However, even though in terms of game planning and strategy and technique, he looked really good in his last fight against Phillips and clearly Firas Zahabi is having a big positive influence on his career. Father Time is undefeated, and there are other aspects to Rob Font's game, or the total package that Rob Font brings to the table, where he is definitely declining, and there's just no way to get around that. So the main issue we've seen in Font is that his chin does appear to have gone, which isn't a huge surprise because he's had almost 30 pro fights. He's 37 years old. He's going to be 38 years old in a few months, which is very old for a bantamweight. And Font's been in a lot of wars. He's a striker. He likes to stand in front of his opponents and stand and bang. And if we look at his record, he's also a bit of a decisionator as well. So, you know, he's spent a lot of time in the octagon. A lot of time, a lot of wear and tear on the body, a lot of miles. He's eaten a lot of shots. What is interesting about Font, though, is that he hasn't been knocked out ever, which is fucking insane. And this is so funny. This is so funny because most people base their betting decisions just based on hazy memories and scanning win-loss records, right? So when I come out and I say, or when I come out and make a statement like, Rob Font's chin is starting to go, there'll be a bunch of wiki cappers who will rush to tell me how much of a clueless fraud I am because Font's never been knocked out. How could his chin possibly have been gone if he's never been knocked out? On paper, I understand their point, but if you look at Font's fights over the last few years, he's been rocked, wobbled, or dropped in many of these fights. And what you notice about Font is that he's getting wobbled very easily at this stage in his career. It doesn't take much to wobble him, to buckle his legs. He'll be wobbled off a jab. He'll be knocked down pretty easily. Now, he's a skilled fighter with great cardio, and he's tough as nails. So he's managed to recover, but there are clear signs in Font's performances over the last couple of years that his chin has gone. He hasn't been knocked out yet, but there's a first time for everything, and I think Matsumoto has a great chance of knocking him out this weekend. So in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, there's just one more thing I want to say about Matsumoto before we actually get into the striking. So what I would say about Matsumoto is his cardio is generally pretty good. He does tend to slow down a bit as fights wear on, and so there's no doubt that Font has much better cardio out of the two. Font has the better gas tank. Font, when it comes to cardio, in many ways is like his teammate Calvin Kattar, who we saw really pour it on last week's card against Yusuf Zalal. Because Font's one of these guys who just doesn't get tired. I've never even seen him breathing heavy. Even in his 5-round matchups, he just keeps coming forward, putting on his opponent. He's absolutely relentless. So, Font can fight at a much higher pace for much longer than Matsumoto can. But what I will say about Matsumoto is that everything about this sport is complex and nuanced. So while he does slow down, I just think he's one of these guys, probably due to his age and inexperience, who just doesn't do a particularly good job of hiding how tired he is. Because ultimately, everyone gets tired in a cage fight to the death. Everyone. Rob Font's going to be very tired this weekend. It's just that some guys are better at hiding it with their body language and the way they move. Matsumoto doesn't hide it so well. His body language is very laboured, very flat in the third round of his fights. But he can't be that tired, because when he's tired, his takedown defense still holds up. He's still scrambly on the ground, and he's still got a lot of pop in his shots and decent hand speed. When you see someone very tired and exhausted, their hand speed falls off a cliff. Matsumoto is one of these weird guys who, when he looks tired, his striking in the pocket is still pretty fast, pretty sharp, pretty accurate. If you go watch a little bit of footage from his third round against Brad Katona, you'll see what I mean. So, even though there's a flatness to him, he's still quite an effective striker. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, they're both very technical. They have different styles of boxing. So Font is a guy that does like to be aggressive, does like to lead the dance, but he fights much longer. He utilizes a lot more jabs, and he does a good job of using his length. He only has a slight reach advantage in this fight, of 3 inches, but a guy like Font really knows how to make the most of that reach advantage, and he's got a great jab, and he fights long. He's very technical. He's good defensively. Matsumoto, on the other hand, is one of these guys that will not take a backward step. He likes to stand in the pocket and bet on his chin against yours to land the counter in a big exchange. Matsumoto's style of striking actually reminds me quite a lot of Vicente Luque's when he first came to the UFC. Obviously, we know Luque's on quite a steep decline. He's not really able to hang in the pocket like he used to. But if you guys think back to when Luque first came in to the UFC, his style of striking was shoulders up, chin tucked, high boxing guard. And when guys would attack him, he would literally just stand in front of him. And in that boxing range, he would look to counter. Matsumoto's a little bit mobile, a little bit better defensively, but for the most part, it's the same sort of vibe that Luque gave us. Same sort of style, same sort of thing. I would say Matsumoto doesn't hit quite as hard as Luque, possibly because he's a fucking bantamweight, so visually it's not the same as watching a welterweight stand in the pocket and uncork bombs, but Matsumoto's still pretty dangerous, does have power. If we look at his record, even though he doesn't have that many wins by knockout, what we have to think about is, even though Font's never been knocked out, he is getting rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot. So the probability of Matsumoto getting knockdowns, wobbling Font in this fight, once, twice, couple of times, maybe even knocking him out, is quite high in my opinion. And of course, we know Font is a relatively low level on the ground, and you can see Matsumoto has tons of submissions on his record, even submitting Dan Argueta, who's a far better grappler than Mr. Font. So this is a good stylistic matchup for Matsumoto, in my opinion, because the only way Font can really win this fight is by outpointing Matsumoto, just outvoluming him, outlanding him. That was a tongue twister. Outstriking him even. Font has to outstrike him with volume. It's unlikely Font knocks Matsumoto out if we look at Font's record. He doesn't really have that kind of knockout power. Yes, he's got the odd win due to strikes here and there, but for the most part, very much a decisionator. It's not going to be easy to knock out a young hungry bull like Matsumoto, so knockout's not that likely. Matsumoto is the more skilled grappler, so it's not like Font's going to be able to do anything to him on the ground. I mean, if Matsumoto handled Katona and Argueta on the ground, he's going to be able to deal with Font just fine. Font's not as good on the ground as Katona or Argueta, and so, realistically, the only way Font can win this fight is by outstriking Matsumoto over 3 rounds. Now, when you look at Matsumoto's path to victory, he's got a decent chance of winning by knockout because Font's chin is starting to go at 37, 38 years old. He can outgrapple Font as well because Font's takedown offense isn't great. He's pretty weak on the ground. And on top of that, Matsumoto could end up outstriking Font. It's not like Font has a clear and obvious advantage on the feet. He doesn't. They're both very skilled strikers. And I would say Matsumoto will certainly be landing the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots because he's got more power and he does throw a decent volume as well. Font's got good volume, but he tends to just touch you with volume strikes, whereas Matsumoto's got the ability to really hurt you. So when I look at a fight like this, for me, you guys know my approach to betting. It's very difficult making money betting on sports. I've made a profit betting on sports every single year for the last 15 years. And my philosophy for making money betting on sports, being profitable over such a long period of time, is I want to find bets where I can overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour. So if I look at a situation like this, if I look at a fight like this, if I bet Matsumoto, I believe I'm overwhelmingly stacking the odds in my favour because the odds give him just an implied probability of 61%. And if we think about all the things Matsumoto's going for him, he's 12 years younger, he hits harder, he's going to be more durable. He's going to be healthier because he's a lot younger. He's got the advantage on the ground. He can win by knockout. He could even outstrike Font. There's a lot of ways in which Matsumoto could win and a lot of things he's got going for him. How does Font win? Well, aside from something utterly insane happening, which we can't account for, the only realistic path to victory for Font is outstriking Matsumoto. Now, yes, it's possible he knocks Matsumoto out. It's possible he submits him. It's possible that fucking Matsumoto gets struck by lightning in the octagon. Anything can happen in a cage fight to the death. However, if we're dealing in probable outcomes, the only real path to victory Font has got is outstriking the young hungry bull, whereas Matsumoto has got so much more going for him. That's why I am strongly considering a bet on Matsumoto this weekend, but with his odds improving, there's no rush for us to lock it in. We can research this fight a second time, take our time with it, think about it, and have a discussion about it in Discord. So let me know what you think. If you're a member of my community, links in the description below. Come chat to me about this fight on Discord, research it, and then come and let me know what you think. Maybe you can help me get over the line on a bet on Matsumoto, or maybe point something out with Rob Font that I haven't thought about, which could be a potential issue for Matsumoto. Let me know what you think on Discord. Really appreciate it. If you're not a member of my community, why the fuck not? I've made a profit every single year for the last 15 years, so you should be. But if you're not and you don't want to be, it's all good. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this fight. Do a little bit of research. Maybe watch, Matsumoto against Katona, Font against, Figueiredo or Kyler Phillips. Figueiredo fight would be better because there's more stand-up. And then let me know what you think in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great week. I hope you crush it. I hope you make loads of money. I'm very confident we're going to crush it this weekend, make some good profits. We've been very unlucky in live betting in recent weeks. Lost a live bet on Katlyn Souza. I felt she won. Lost a live bet on Jamal Pogues. Felt he won. Both are big underdog odds. We should be up bigly. So it's time the universe paid us back and gifted us some wins this weekend. So check out my live betting group as well. You'll love it. You will absolutely love it. So thank you very much for watching. Take care. Love you all. See you next week. Nice one, guys. Bye.